Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the interviews here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you're interested or know any folks that would be interested in coming on the show and chatting, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is Isaac11. All right, so with that out of the way, I got coffee ready, and I'm excited for my guest. My guest today is Georgia N. Georgia, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hello. How are you doing? Say I have tea. I cheated. I got tea.
That's fine. That's fine. Depending on where you are in the world, I think there's a particular time where coffee becomes, at least for me, problematic after a particular day, like time. It's 11 here where I'm at, so this is probably, I've been nursing this coffee for a while, so it's also a big one.
Nice. Well, I have an air conditioning unit over my head, so it cools off the coffee way too fast, but tea stays warm for a bit longer.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't do hot drinks really at all. I'm very strange. Like and this is just maybe TMI, but I burn the inside of my mouth way too much. Like I'll drink like coffee that's even like a little bit warmer than lukewarm. I'm like, so I just literally, it can be -10 and I'll drink an iced coffee, which drives my wife absolutely crazy. Cool. Do you want to give a little, intro to kind of who you are and all that sort of stuff, and we'll get started?
Yeah. My name's Georgia. I'm a software engineer, about 22 years, 20 of it being in the game industry. I'm also a partnered Twitch streamer. I have been partnered 6 years coming up in January. I can't do the math anymore. It's like everything's blurred over the past 2 years.
So strange. What's happened in the last 2 years?
Nothing.
Nothing at all. Awesome. Well, I'd love to, kind of get started, and we can talk about streaming and all the other cool stuff that you did in the game industry, that you do in the game industry. I like to, begin our conversations with, a tech origin story. So, do you remember like a point in time in your life when you came across technology, whether it be hardware or software, games, whatever, and you thought, that's cool, I want to do that? Do you have a memory that comes to mind?
Yeah, my grandfather used to say he'd run across something. And I used to think he literally would like drive along the road and find something and pick it up and bring it home, because that's how kids' brains work, right? And I was 13 and he brought me an IBM 386 that
cool.
that he ran across, and it had a compiler on it for BASIC, so I started to write games.
So sorry to interrupt you. When you say ran across, like I immediately think like it fell off the back of a truck.
Yeah,
like,
that's what it. Yeah, like
is Grandpa, like, is he in the bootleg business?
No,
like
okay. He found something. It was his way of saying like I found something for you. So he would run across a lot of stuff, but the computer was cool, and he was the first person to really kindle the love for technology, which you wouldn't expect. I grew up in the South. I grew up being told, oh, you're going to be a great teacher or secretary or mom, let's get you a husband, go to college, get an MRS degree and all that kind of junk. And, he wasn't like that. It's like, cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm just going to go with the narrative that Grandpa like was in the second-hand acquisition business. Like, I don't know the best way to say it, but good for Grandpa to get you a computer, regardless of how he obtained it. Let's just go with that. Cool. Like, that's great. So, I'm guessing then you got started kind of with, programs on CDs over the mail and stuff like that, or floppies over the mail or whatever. Like, is that kind of how you got started? Or floppies. I don't know. I don't want to date anybody, but like when people say like, when there's certain types of computers that people mention, and I'm like, I immediately place them. I'm like, oh, like they're that generation of technologists.
I started
like me personally.
I started with floppies, the big kind.
Yeah. Okay. The big ones?
Big kind. Well, I can't remember. Was it 5? It was 5.5 or 5 1/4. I don't remember the
Yeah,
5-inch ones like this, not
yeah.
these. That's my husband. This that sounds really bad, but I'm just gonna let that one go. He has a copy of Zork. Saved.
Perfect. That's awesome. That's pretty cool. Let's move on
Yes.
quickly. So no, that's cool. So, at what point in time, I guess, did you kind of figure out like I can, you mentioned, where you were growing up, or in during the time, like there weren't a ton of paths. Um, when did you figure out like I want to do this tech thing? Like this is what I want to do.
Junior year in college.
Yeah, that's
I got
awesome.
a minor
That's
in
awesome.
computer science because I was like, oh, well, this is fun. And I just need to chuck a minor in here for whatever reason. I didn't even get a complimentary minor to my major, which was actually French. Um, and I went to live in France for my last semester or so and finished up my education for my major. But while I was there, they offered me a job in the computer lab. And so I was working in the computer lab while I was there. And I got back and I had honed my programming skills. I had taken a little laptop with me, a gateway, um, the best kind with the cow boxes. Um,
Oh my
mm,
goodness.
and I had a project that was due for one of my courses, and instead of writing a 20-page paper like everybody else, I wrote a program
Sure.
that was like Encyclopedia Britannica. And my
Interesting.
advisor looked at me and was like, "You're in the wrong role. Everything's wrong." And she convinced me to bounce from the teaching program I was in because I was actually going to be a French teacher. Um,
Okay.
and so I came back I was done with my junior year. I came into my senior year and she told me to no more. And I had enough credits to graduate. So I graduated after that semester. So I got out half a year early. But yeah, I didn't know until real late that it was even a thing I could do. I had no
Sure.
idea.
Yeah. And were you fortunate enough to get kind of like a computer related job right out of school
Yeah,
or yeah.
I did. I'm just as shocked as anybody else would be. I didn't get asked to
I'm
leak
not. I'm
code.
not.
Oh no, no, no. I was an idiot. I knew nothing. Nothing. College does not prepare you for actually coding anything that isn't in a data structures and algorithms book. It was
Sure.
it was wild. Um, I was completely unprepared. But and I also I didn't have and I never really say that like you have to have a degree, but there was something about the the degree programs back then that gave you this structured path to help you understand why you do things a certain way. I can't
Sure.
speak to the courses now. But I feel like sometimes students today need to put as much of their spare time into it as they do to the actual coursework in order to
Yeah.
stay ahead of everything because tech is moving so fast. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking like Java was so new back then. C sharp wasn't a thing. C was still the
Mm-hmm.
big language of choice.
Yep.
And there was ASP, but it was like old school ASP with, percent signs and crap.
Yeah, the ASPOG, ASP Classic.
Mhm.
No, I mean I go on this rant a lot. So like I think that and again I can't speak for current college curriculums, but I can only speak to when I was in college, which was 15 years ago, 13 years ago. It very much, at least to me, sets us up in a situation where yeah, like there's a funnel to like academic sort of computer science, but like at least in the school that I went to, like I can't think of very many opportunities for like, oh, I'm gonna learn like this sort of high level set of algorithms, and then I'm gonna be able to get a job like building forms over data, because that's the job for most people, right?
Yeah.
Um, I switched to like a IS degree, and I fit in a bit better there, I guess you could say, because I was always very like, oh, like this is like I'm actually taking technology and using it to solve problems instead of like basically like throwing computers at math, which I think a lot of computer science curriculums tend to do. Not to knock computer science curriculums, even though I kind of do. Um, I think that nowadays there's tons of opportunities for different ways for people to learn how to be in tech,
Yeah.
right? You don't need to go to university, which I think is cool.
I mean, I still had microfiche. So for me, I didn't have Google, YouTube, anything like that
Yeah.
to learn from.
Yeah.
I just had college courses. So, I mean, we're talking back in like the year 2000. So I'm old. And it was just not as accessible. Now there's so many resources out there that it just seems like a waste sometimes to even think about going to college for it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's still some value in some of in like especially the way it depends on how you learn, right?
Yeah.
I think some people are way more adaptable with sort of like online courses or following tutorials or whatever. Some people I think they need to be in a room listening to people talk and you know doing that sort of thing, which is the more traditional route, which I get. I know we were talking about this a little bit before stream. Like I have too much ADHD to like pay attention to anything for like more than like 15 minutes. Like it becomes a challenge too. Like if I'm actually trying to learn something, I'm just like, "Oh, that's a cool thing." Or I'll, you know, take a break and Google something and then I'll look at the clock and it's been 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like uh yeah, it's definitely but I appreciate the options that folks have now.
Yeah.
I have a so, yeah, so kind of, you're in college, you get a job out of college, and you're doing tech stuff and you're enjoying it. Like, what point in time, since you do have a background like in the game industry, at what point in time did you think gaming as a career was approachable? Because at least for me, when I was a kid, it's like, oh, I want to build video games, and then like I never went anywhere near that at any point in my career.
I fell into it. It was a complete and utter accident. Um, I I ran a website called the Drunken Friar, which was a fan-based website for Dark Age of Camelot, and one of those MMO classes called the Friar, which is like a hybrid healer, right? Healer fighter. And
Yep.
I just got so well known with the company and the designers that when they wanted to hire someone to build and maintain their social web presence, as in like not
Mm-hmm.
Twitter but their own like community website with resources and stuff,
Yeah.
I was like the first person they wanted to call. And I had met some of the staff at like a convention and everything, so they just knew who I was. So I like to just tell people, like, I just stumbled headfirst into it. It wasn't like one day I woke up and I was like, I'm gonna work there. And I had
Sure.
actually been unemployed for 9 months, um, because the first company I worked for basically shut down after a year and a half. So I had gone back to school to start working on filling those gaps, because I always up until I finally fulfilled the goal felt like I was lacking something without that degree.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I had one company in Austin actually turn me down specifically because I did not have a bachelor's of science in computer science.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like, but I have a master's
Yeah.
in software engineering. And yeah, it was dumb,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
got on my nerves. But yeah, I mean, the gaming thing was just an accident, and then from there, I actually got more exposure to a good programming foundations. Because the thing about like the game industry is they move very quickly. Like everything is
Sure.
an
Sure.
emergency. Every day is, oh God, we're all going to die. So you have to learn
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah, and I'm not. So there's a television show, if anybody watches it, called Mythic Quest, which is about that. And I imagine you probably don't watch it because it probably cuts way too close, similar
I've
to
heard about it.
how a lot of people how a lot of people in tech don't watch Silicon Valley because it cuts a little bit too close. Um, but like the joke is in Mythic Quest, it's like there's always something that needs to get built, and there's always some rush to get that thing, and then hijinks ensue because it's a comedy. But like at least my outsider's perspective is in the game industry, it's all like, let's push all of our might into a particular endeavor. And then when that's done, there's like a little bit of celebration, but mostly it's okay, now the next thing comes out. right? Like there's no, and I think this is an issue in tech in general, like the opportunity to like sit and just appreciate the work that's been put in to get something out the door is kind of lost because the business always wants more, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's the entertainment industry, so
Yeah,
game development mirrors um, uh, the movie industry in a lot of ways. So like the way you would produce a film is pretty much parallel to how you would produce a game.
yeah,
So it's like yes, we do have a little bit of time at the end to celebrate, but there's already been a team spun off to think of the next thing,
yeah,
and sometimes publishers don't give you time for the next thing. Sometimes publishers go, hey, it's been 3 months, you haven't paid back production costs yet, what's going on?
sure.
And then they lay off 400 people.
I feel too like, I mean, and I'm not a super avid gamer, but I've dabbled a bit, and I've noticed that probably like in the last 15-20 years or so, there's been like a push from like these standalone games to franchise games that are powered by like expansions,
Hmm.
right? And I wonder, and if you have any, you know, insider information about that, I would love to hear. But does that make the life of a developer harder, or does it make it easier? Because at least then, like you just know something is always coming. Um, like it's kind of like that like not slow drip, but like, hey, every 6 months we're gonna ship an expansion for, I don't know, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, or
Yeah.
whatever the game is, right?
Um, so there's two sides to it. On one side, it does give you a feeling of more stability. It's like, okay, I know when I'm done with this game that in 2, 3, whatever years, we'll have to start on the sequel. So we're just going to keep going with like the different versions of it
Yeah,
or expansions or whatever. The other side of the coin is that it's creatively stifling. So you get
yeah,
artists, especially the art staff, who don't want to do that again. They want to have more creative freedom and power of expression, and they can't do that if they're always making yet another rifle for the game. you
yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
so
Every weapon looks the same after like 2 or 3 revs anyway,
like
right? Like, oh,
Madden.
we need a little bit more etching.
Yeah,
Yeah,
take
Madden.
Madden for
I
example. I worked on two
Yeah,
iterations of Madden, and it's there's so much more that goes into it than changing out the UI and the roster. Okay, I know people like to joke about it, but those forward-thinking teams, sometimes they're working on stuff that doesn't actually hit the disc for 3 years.
yeah,
And it's hard because you do have that kind of churn where for 9 months you're going real hard because they have dates that they have to stick to for releasing per contract. And you're working really hard on that, and then you're like, well, let's start all over again, but it's
yeah,
also there's the assuredness of, okay, I've got a job next year. It's
yeah.
like that.
Not to downplay like our friends in design or our friends in creative, but I imagine, at least in a lot of cases, like that's the quote unquote easy part, right? Like, oh, like we're gonna change, the number of polygons for a player, or we're gonna change the menu interface. Like, I guess those are simpler changes to make, but like if you're going to add like some new story campaign or some new stupid microtransaction thing where people need to collect cards, which I don't even get started on that sort of thing. um like I'd imagine those things have to be so thought out, where else at least in my experience with creative, like it's very transactional. Like, this is what we need, okay, we got it. This is what we need, okay, it's got it. And there's not a ton of, this is going to sound terrible, not a ton of planning with it.
It depends on
Is
the
that
product. I don't think it's an
Yeah,
accurate assessment. I think there's a lot of work that goes in by all parties and all disciplines for a
sure.
product. There's accessibility concerns that have come to the forefront in the past handful of years. Because gaming should be for everyone,
Yep.
and so they have to think of things like that when doing the UI, or you know, adjusting based off of metrics that they've gathered from the previous product.
Yeah.
Like, okay, players are having trouble finding this feature. We put this feature in, but it's not being used. Why? And then they have to kind of
Mm-hmm.
analyze that stuff and work with the art team or designers in order to make a cohesive product. So there's lots of elements that go into it. It's not just like, you know, let's just change this guy's stats in a database. So,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
sound easy. It really does. And maybe that
No.
part is
Yeah.
easy, but there's so much other stuff. The iteration that I worked on, the second one was Madden 15, and so much thought was being put into just the stadium crowd and how to make it look
Mm-hmm.
full
Yeah.
and active, but not
Yep.
dumb, like posters bouncing around in the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
involved all disciplines, and that was a really
Sure.
big endeavor.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And I think also, and to maybe drift it back into the thought about like the constant churn, right? Like I remember, like I played Madden, I played, NBA Live or 2K or those sort of games like before all these games are plugged into the internet. So like something like keeping rosters up to date. All of that, or just something as simple as like, okay, like this player's now better, like than they were like 6 months ago. Like they're just better. Like Madden got it wrong with the ratings. We have to fix this, right? Like now that things are so internet driven, I wonder how much pressure that puts on all disciplines, like the folks that are in charge of stats, the folks that are in charge of analysis and creative and all that stuff, because you can literally ship like new stuff like every week, right? Like I feel like rosters get updated once a week, right? Like it's pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and they just do patches. Like now we have the ability to do patches. And I mean, it's been years since I've worked there, so I can't speak to how they do things now,
Yeah.
clearly. But it was not uncommon. We were on the Xbone and PS4 iterations, uh, that generation.
Yeah.
And so we were capable of patching the data, and it was just like a
Yeah.
single file could be patched.
Yeah.
But people don't understand that, like, at least in the console realm, doing a patch isn't as easy as like if you were patching a PC game on Steam.
Yeah.
Your patch has to
Yeah.
go through lot check, not only with your company, but also way up the chain at Xbox proper or
Yeah.
PlayStation proper. They have to give you clearance, and it can only be a certain size, and it can only have certain kinds of updates to it without a
Interesting.
full re-rating. Yeah, like there's so much that goes into it. And a lot of that, I used to teach video game history for George Mason, and a lot of it all stems back to ET on the Atari 2600, because like the Atari had so many unlicensed games because all of their stuff was open and public, and you could just
Yep.
crap out the worst games to be like, it's an Atari 2600 game. And so now there's all these checks and balances in place, but that's good because it ensures that people who play a game on those systems get a quality product.
So you said something and it completely sent my brain. What used to teach video game
I
history
did.
at a fairly well-known
Yeah.
college, right? Uh, I would love to hear. You don't have to go. You probably talk about it all the time, or have talked about it all the time. But I would love to kind of get, the thing that at least interests like me is like what kind of student takes that class, right? Because in my brain, I think of it as like there's probably a couple of groups. There's one is like the diehards, like the people who love video games. They probably also, I'm not trying to be offensive, but they probably also like comic books and they love superhero movies and they love tech in general and they're in that quote unquote nerd geek fandom stuff. There's also probably people that think I could get an A in this class because like
Not my class.
I've taken it. Oh, sure, but again, I so I've taken enough classes when I was in college, and I'd be in there. I was like, oh man, this like, especially now because there's websites that like will rank how easy teachers are and stuff like that, and how easy courses are. And I remember like being in a class and some guy, literally, he only showed up for the test. He was on the basketball team, I didn't go to a large school, but he was well enough known that he was on the basketball team. And he would literally come down like during a test. He would like give a fist bump to the professor, sit down, take the test like 15 minutes, like a test that should take like 2 hours, 15 minutes, and then just leave. And it's like, okay, what's going on there? I have a good understanding, but like that kind of person took the class just because they could get a particular grade in it, right? I you don't need to go into gruesome detail, but how was it being a instructor for video games, or not instructor, professor for video games at a college where people obviously are aware of video games?
Yeah, it was part of GMU's programs for video games. So they actually have degree programs. And this was considered one of the requirements, at least for the design track, an elective for art or engineering. I think competing with colleges like Full Sail and DigiPen, for example, think along those lines. Like they're geared specifically toward video games, because there were a lot in the area at the time. I don't know who's there now, but there are still up in Maryland. We've got Bethesda and such. So the program, actually, I didn't run into any students that felt like, oh, this is an easy A. But that's because at least when I taught it in person, I wanted the course to be fun. Like this
Sure.
is a class about video games. This is going to be fun. We're going to talk. We're going to do 2 lectures. I taught Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll do 2 lectures to talk about an era, and then I'm going to bring a console in, and we're going to play the games. And I had a huge
Oh, cool.
projector. So we hooked things up to a huge projector. I brought in like an Atari, Commodore, NES, SNES, Sega Genesis. Like I brought all of these consoles in with
Yeah.
games. And like that, I think the literal best class was I brought my GameCube in and we played Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, we would do that so it was 2 lectures on the era, 1 day where we played the games, and then that next class we would actually discuss, okay, what are the design characteristics that, like, where do they come from?
Sure.
And what is pulling from those today? Like, what do we still see in today's games? And how would we improve on them? And we would just have a discussion. And people really loved that course. Now, when I had to switch
Yeah.
to online, I didn't like it as much. And I bowed out of it about 2 years ago, because I just felt like I was churning kids through. And at that point, I felt like that was more of like, the easy A kind of class,
Sure.
minus the research paper. So I don't think it was good for anything other than in person, because I felt like that kind of class was better for students when it was hands-on, instead of just, Bueller kind of lecturing. Just not me.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably something interesting to say about, especially like, and I don't know what like the course description was or anything like that, but if I'm like anybody who's like played video games in my entire life, I'd be like, I know enough about video games to get like a B in this class. And I'm glad that you didn't go down that path of like, because I took classes like computer science classes where like I knew first day I'm like, okay, this class is going to be very hard. And then I've had other classes there's like, oh, this I don't have to go to any of these lectures. And I think it's a disservice to the whole process of getting educated if you never go to class, right? So at least keeping kids engaged, or kids isn't a fair word, college student age people engaged enough to like come to class by playing games and stuff is really great. Um,
Mhm.
and I imagine for the most part, like you mentioned, there's a part of the curriculum for like a track. So most of the people who would join were interested in actually pursuing it as a career.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which I
and
think is
and, and
cool.
it was an elective, so they didn't have to be in that program in order to take it, but priority was given to the students. And it got to the point where I had 50 students at one point, and I was just like, oh my god, this
That's a
is like
lot. That's a
It's a
lot.
lot of students. Yeah, it is. I mean, well, when you
Yeah.
think about like biology 101 and you got like 300 people sitting in an
Oh, sure.
auditorium and you're like,
Sure.
"Arr." Yeah, but those people, those professors have assistants. I did not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Also, yeah, there's a contract. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
mm, no, no,
Uh,
no. I mean, that's
yeah.
a, you're good.
Yeah. There's like a contract like when you have those big classes and I guess befriended a professor who taught like one of the entry level computer science classes, and he very much was like, it is a system. Like there's I have no emotion in these classes. Like these classes are solely for like filtering out people that are interested in this, and then maybe in the next class and the class after that, like I can build a rapport with them and whatever. He said it was very simple as like, look, a lot of my colleagues, for instance, like not in computer science, but in other ones like practical sciences, like the only reason why they do like entry level chemistry is because they can write the book on entry level chemistry and make that book a requirement, right? So like there's totally like a contract that gets kind of signed because I don't think college professors are really excited about those entry level classes. So there has to be some incentivization. Um, but it sounds like your class specifically was like it already had weeded people out to an extent, which I think is good. Because I think the worst thing you at least for me is somebody who attempts to educate people. Getting people that are not interested is like a bummer. Like, and if
Mm.
you get enough people that are disinterested, it's a super bummer, and then you get like that imposter syndrome where you can do. Am I actually good at this, or do I think that I'm good at this? Like, I have this conversation with myself all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met an engineer that doesn't have a hellacious case of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's and like it's. I probably have. I don't. There probably is a phrase for it, and this is. I don't mean this to be offensive in any way, but it's like tech bipolarism, right? Where like people feel like they're the top of the world, that whatever like rockstar developer, whatever cliche phrase that doesn't actually make sense, and then like once you hit that high, you go down, and then you're have imposter syndrome, and it's cyclical like that. At least that's how I think. Like if I do something good, I'm like, oh man, I'm really good at this tech thing. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I smashed that bug. Like, this is awesome. Or like, oh, like people are enjoying the content that I created. Like, I'm very, very good at this. And then like literally 2 days later, I'm sitting there. I'm like, why won't this build? I'm horrible at my job. I look at my wife like maybe we should just like move to like the jungle and like never see anything ever again. And then she's like, you couldn't do that because you need internet constantly or you'll die. But no, like I think there
Yeah.
is something cyclical about that, which I think is very, very interesting. Um, do you kind of transitioning from like gaming industry stuff to kind of some of the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to kind of hear, like, obviously you went from, you know, that culture of game development, right? Moving things along really quickly, trying to get things out the door, and now you're working at Microsoft, still working
Right.
kind of in the gaming space, but like, um, how is kind of your feeling about working in tech change, like switching careers of sorts, not careers, but like disciplines.
Yeah. It's like going from the storming Normandy beach to a Buddhist colony.
Oh,
It's
that's
very relaxing. I am afforded the time to learn, to pick up new technologies, to experiment, while also driving my own projects.
yeah.
Though I will say, like, I don't know if that's the norm. I came in at principal level,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of expected, is that a principal engineer at Microsoft is somebody who's like basically driving things.
Yeah.
Um, less hands in code. Like I haven't actually coded anything aside from trying to learn a little bit of Unity and Unreal just so I could speak to those engines,
Mm-hmm.
because I've always worked in proprietary engines. But yeah, it's just it was so hard to kind of put it into words, when because I get asked this a lot, like, how is it? What's it like being on the outside? And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I can see my kids.
Sure.
I can cook dinner. I I I don't feel guilty if I need to get up and I want to go take a walk for 30 minutes. I don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm being monitored. Like, hey, your teams went yellow. Are you okay? Are you there? Are you there? I mean, that
Yeah.
literally was happening. I couldn't take lunch. I could
Sure.
not take lunch without coming back to a wall of text from people.
Yeah.
So it's just everything kind of just went, whew,
Sure.
and
And you
yeah.
mentioned, yeah, and you mentioned something that's quite interesting, and I'd love to kind of drill into a little bit more. Like you talked about like leveling, right, of
Yeah.
career, right, like principal, right. So for folks that might not know, like you might start out as an associate if your company does associates, or and then you kind of move up to like your base software development engineer, SD, whatever you want to call it, and then you go to senior, and then you go to principal. So like principal kind of, at least in my mind, kind of being a very very technical person, but a big but caring about big picture a lot. So like you've obviously made this progression in your career. Like what was, I guess, your opinion of the principal level before you became principal, and how different is it than what it is now that you're actually here?
So in the game industry, it's different. And I suppose with every company, it probably means something different.
Sure.
The one thing in common is scope. So the further you move up, the bigger your scope and your influences over either different teams, different domains, technologies, whatever. So I guess what I didn't expect was to have more, not like a leadership or like a managerial kind of position,
Sure.
but more of like a guiding hand kind of role.
Mm-hmm.
I like to joke that I feel like I'm Gandalf right now, in basically saying, here's how we should do something, and always get shocked when someone's like, okay. And I'm like, whoa, okay. I'm not used to that. People agreeing. It's very weird. Um, yeah, I mean, at least like in past employment, it's usually been how smart are you in comparison with the other people at that level, and can we afford to promote you?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's a ceiling there, right?
Yeah.
Because some companies have quotas on how many people they can have in a certain bucket. um my last company, the it went associate levels 1, 2, 3, 4, staff, then principal, then senior staff. It's very weird, very weird. And but anything beyond level 4 was considered honorary,
Yeah.
so I was told. So it was like, okay, but in my mind it meant that you basically could tear down the game and rewrite it yourself.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So now it's less, can I personally tear down the product and rebuild it myself with all the knowledge of a whole suite of engineers? Now it's more about knowing where my gaps are, researching, talking to subject matter experts, getting that information and formulating a plan, and working with others um, to get there. And I'm sure some game companies are like that, just not the ones I've worked at.
Sure. Yeah, I think that you mentioned something too, that it's really dependent on the company. I think also one thing that's really interesting, at least from people that I've talked to that made that transition from senior to principal, the expectation was that they'd be like do far more like mentorship, right?
Yep.
And I think that really is dependent on the job too. But like a lot of people thought initially like, oh, I'm just gonna do a lot more code reviews. And it's like, yeah, sure, there's probably a part of that, but like the job shouldn't be to like be another thing that sits in the middle. The thing is should be enabling people to do that sort of work themselves, right? Or
Yep.
figuring out how to like, because I think one thing that's very very clear to me from being in tech as long as I am is that there's always going to be a shortage of people in tech, like whether it be engineers or PMs or testers or designers or whoever, right? Like there's never going to be a surplus. So like as effect like you're only as effective as the people that have helped you get to where you are. And if you've been put in a situation where you've had crummy mentors or no mentors or crummy colleagues or no colleagues or whatever, it really can stifle how you progress in your career. Which a lot of people don't think of. They think of like if they don't get a job, oh, it's because I did something wrong. No, you should probably have some retrospective, like, okay, how have I been put in this position to this point? Not to blame other people, but it's a part of the entire ecosystem.
Hmm. Yeah. I
Yeah.
like building up engineers. That's one of the things I really enjoy. My previous role, I actually trained two engineers on network engineering, like programming, I should say,
Hmm.
because people confuse when I say like, "Oh, I've done networking," they think the IT DevOps side of things, and I
I
actually
have
mean
a
like, no, no,
cable.
no. Yeah, I'm like, no, no,
Yeah.
no, client server code, like
Yeah. Yeah.
MMO backends, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I had written a system that was heavy client server technology, but was pretty much the only person at the company that understood that stuff. So
Hmm.
I made sure that I taught at least two other people in my immediate circle,
Yeah.
all about everything that I did, and I got to the point with one of them that he could actually correct me. So that was actually pretty nice. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, okay, that's a thing.
Yeah. It kind of cuts both ways, right? Like you build these people up, these folks up, so not only do you make your life easier, you make their life better, whatever, but like they could take work from you or they could teach you something.
Mhm.
It's very cyclical, and I think mentorship is something that I'm very very um, into, and I think that's if you don't have an opportunity to mentor, like you can mentor anybody no matter what level you are, there's somebody probably who is trying to get into tech that you can mentor, right? So if you have the opportunity to mentor people or you don't know where to start, there's tons of resources out there. How is, I guess, through your career, like how has your relationship with mentorship been? Like obviously you might have had some mentors, maybe some good ones, maybe some not good ones, and now that you've kind of progressed into someone who has both mentors and mentees, how has that kind of been for you?
Um, at first I got bounced around a lot, at least in games.
Yeah.
Well, my first job out of college was not in games. It was actually writing a sewer monitoring system. I finally got to the point where I took it off my resume, but it was only there as an icebreaker because it was literally if there was too much poop in the sewer, my website would blink an alarm. So bad. But it was an icebreaker because everybody was like, tell me about this.
Yeah.
Um, so I had no mentors there at all. They were too busy trying to put out the product, and they hired a lot of new grads.
Hmm.
Um, and as I worked through the game industry, I basically glommed onto central characters, your
Sure.
main characters, to pick up knowledge, learn new things, and eventually we got more robust online resources, and I just started to teach myself a lot of stuff. But most of my client server and uh, knowledge came from my first 10 years in the game industry while working on MMOs. And that was thanks to mentors, absolutely. And I don't. It's never like a forced assignment, right? It's just
Yeah.
somebody kind of just is like, hey, come over here. I'm going to teach you some stuff, you
Hmm.
know, and they take you under your wing and lift you up instead of pushing you down as like a competition thing. You'll see a lot of that too in every job, every industry. You'll have like that one programmer who's super dude. You lock them in a closet, code comes out, and
Yeah.
everybody's just happy as long as Cheetos are shoved in there. Yeah,
Sure.
those don't make good mentors.
Yeah, I that they have there's tons of phrases, backroom developers or dark matter developers
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Um, they serve a purpose, and I think that's great. I think one of the things too that I think that persona has started to kind of disappear. It's been replaced by a similar persona, but is a bit more extroverted, but in an unhealthy way.
Mm,
Like I've realized I don't run into very many people in tech that like don't like to be talked to and just sit in rooms and crank out code anymore. I don't see that a ton, and maybe that's just because I work at big companies where everybody is into tech, so maybe at smaller companies that sort of exists. But I think that the transfix of that is that there's now people that don't have really really strong social skills, but still crank out code, which I think is even more dangerous than like the people that you just don't talk to.
Mm.
Yeah, so I don't really. There's not a question. I think it's just a statement there. But I think that there's something interesting to say about like social skills being more important, in my opinion, for the job than the technical stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Soft
one thing.
soft skills are
Go ahead.
definitely important and definitely underrated.
Yeah. I would love to transition a little bit, from, straight tech talk, career sort of stuff to, something that, most people probably are aware of you by your presence live streaming, right? I think one of the things that I love when we were talking about this before is that if you sign up for one of Fierce Kitten's streams, like, there can be creative content, so sewing, or you can be, doing code, or you can be playing video games or whatever, right? And it's like kind of like the whole hodgepodge of stuff, right? Is there a particular reason why you think that that is so interesting to, I guess, your community, is like people who, sign up for the entire experience versus just the coder or just the video game player or just the sewer? I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I like to think they come for the discussions, that they come
Yeah.
for the rest of the community, that it's not I guess people have said that I'm like a personality streamer, meaning they don't
Mm,
come specifically to see this kind of content. They come
yeah.
to interact with me and everybody else in the community. I don't think I'm that interesting, but whatever. But I just try to have fun conversations, and I just so happen to be coding or playing a game or sewing in the background.
Yeah.
That's basically it. It's just hanging out with people is really what it ends up being. Even my coding streams are like that. I know, like before we went live, I was telling you how like I could basically be writing lines of code, whole on algorithms while talking about my
Yeah.
neighbors.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think, you mentioned something that I think it's almost the thing. Like, people tune in for the personality. I mean, there's something to say that if you have a following and you're just like not interesting, like, you must be like the content must be just absolutely like stellar, because at the end of the day, like, there is something to say about like they tune in for, like, people listen to particular radio shows for the host, people watch certain television shows for the actors or actresses, people, whatever, they follow people on Twitter mostly for the entire experience, right? Which is why it's so odd when some people are like, "Oh, why are you tweeting about politics?" I'm like, "Well, you signed up for it, so you can unsubscribe if you want to."
yeah, like, because
But
it's my Twitter. Thanks.
yeah, but I think there's something to say, like, all of these different platforms, social media channels, whatever you want to call them, like, it's very personality driven, and the content is just along for the ride. And sometimes the content is very very good, and it becomes other content that could be very very interesting. But for the most part, like, if you're on camera for 2 or 3 hours, like, you have to have like some personality, and that's probably not fair. That's probably not fair for a lot of people that do the live streaming thing, but you gotta have, like, you just
You
can't
got to get
be.
used to talking to yourself. That's the thing, is like I must sound like a complete bonkers person to my kids because I'm
Nah,
just in here
well, yeah.
talking to myself all day. But it's yeah, like when I first started streaming, and I had been teaching, I taught at GMU and all that stuff, so I was
Yep.
used to being like in front of people. But I
Hmm.
started sewing and I only had one camera, and it was on the sewing machine, and I was like, crap, I need to get up and iron something. And I was just like internal made external for dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I guess I'll just get up and I'll go over here, but I can't leave the stream idle and you can't hear me if I walk away. So I'm going to put my foot up on the desk so you see I'm
Okay.
still here while ironing. And I didn't know at the time Twitch had a rule that you can't show feet.
Oh, that's hilarious. I was gonna say,
Um,
like, you probably got a lot of follows, like when you put your foot up on the
I,
thing,
d- I
but
didn't, thank God. I had three people in the room, and one was my husband, and the other was my mother. And it's so stupid though, but it's like, even then my quirks were coming out,
Sure.
that's just how I am. Like I've always been like a class clown, and want to be the center of attention. Let's be honest. Pretty much everybody on Twitch wants to be the center of attention if they want to get anywhere.
Yeah, I think there is something that you have, like there are a certain personality type that gravitates towards being, and this is the really loaded word, like influencer, right? Because
Yeah.
we all fit our, like everybody who thinks that they can like do live streaming or being on Twitter or making you like, oh, we're all like influencers, even though like we're not Marcus Brownlee, like we're all influencers, right? Um, but I think there is something that's very, very interesting that you said, like the idea that it's just for you, right? Like if you're in a stream with like 3 people, right? That's great. Like if you're doing it for yourself, that's awesome. And I think like that's what I do. Like I don't have a huge following. Sometimes I'll get a bunch of people. Sometimes I won't get anybody. But I do it solely because it's enjoyable for me. And if you can get past the like, oh, my vanity metrics aren't as high as they should be, it's really when you take that next step of actually really like, people tell me all the time, like stuff just happens. Like you'll be churning along and then all of a sudden like, oh, why do I have like 100 more Twitter followers like out of nowhere?
Yeah.
Like nothing happened. Like did people just all of a sudden like they find me? No. I mean like you probably did something. But I think there is something to say about like it is entertainment. Like to go all the way back to our conversation about like the game industry, right? This is just entertainment for people. Like a friend of mine likes to using the phrase like edutainment. Like if you can like be entertaining and educational at the same time, like more than likely you can be successful. And like learning how to sew or learning how to code, or there's people that literally play violins on these things. Could you imagine? Like it's just it's just, but like again,
Are you joking? Because there's a violin behind me.
Everybody can see the violin. I've seen the violin
Okay,
too.
okay.
I was being cheeky, but I guess
Okay.
my
Like, wait a
point
second.
is, yeah, my point being very much is like, and maybe it's just because of the way we are as human beings now, where we have such short attention spans. You have to keep the dopamine dripping constantly. You have to keep the adrenaline pumping constantly, or else people will find something else to elevate their heart rate or give them happy thoughts or whatever.
Yeah, I feel it every time I take a vacation. If I need to take a week off, and I'm in the middle of trying to plan a cross country move, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm scared. I can't stream the rest of the week because my husband's turning 50. And so we have lots of friends and family coming in.
Sure.
And so I'm entertaining people that aren't online. And it's like, I can't be online. And that scares me every single time. And my subs will spike, ebb and flow. But the core of the group is always there. So, and I think the big thing I could tell people who try to get into streaming is make sure you talk to everybody the same way as if you had 5 viewers or 500 viewers.
Yeah.
Because they can tell.
Yeah.
And
what are you scared of? Is it the FOMO of not being with the community? Like, 'cause I see, like, you don't seem like somebody who's really hung up on like follower count, right?
No.
Is it just like, oh, these are my friends and I want to hang out with my friends and I feel like missing out on my friends?
Yeah, it's the missing out. Yeah, it's like I have a very active Discord where I keep up with people, and because I mean, not to sound weird, but most of like I view these people as friends. They're not just bits and bytes on the internet for me. I've got one like who's basically driving down to take some of our IKEA furniture that is absolutely not going to make it to the next location. No. And it's like, and I didn't even stop to think about it. I was like, oh no, yeah, we'll bring Pellin over. Pellin can come over. Heck yeah, I've known him for 6 years online.
Yeah.
Right. And I've met him in person. That does help. But for me, especially in the past 2.5 years, this community has saw me through a ton and has helped me a lot. So I'm grateful. These are my friends.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Like, you know, we were talking about this before, like you and I have never actually, I don't think I've had a conversation, right? But like talked on Twitter, we follow each other, whatever, right? So it's like, oh, we are, I guess, Twitter friends, I guess is what it's called, right? But like
Internet
never, yeah,
friends.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. I
this
mean,
whole this
there is that separation. You do have to have
yeah,
some boundaries. I don't want everybody
yeah.
to show up at my house for ice
Nope.
cream, but
No.
it yeah, it's still, it's like I absolutely would say that you know these people are my friends, and
Yeah.
I they've just nursed me through a lot. I try not to trauma dump, but there are times where you're like, oh
Yeah.
my god, this happened.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Like I one of the things so I think a lot of people have just been obsessed with TikTok, right? And like
Mm.
there's people that I follow for laughs and occasionally like they'll drop just like a big like you said trauma bomb and I'm just like, "Ah, man." Like I get all sorts of like in my own head I'm like I feel like an asshole for like all of a sudden like, "Oh, like where's my funny content? Why are you making me sad?" Like I don't want that. Um, but I think like going back to the conversation earlier, it's like you follow the whole person because at the end of the day, like that's how you really get that connection. Because if you were just doing tech stuff or you were just, not showing your face on camera and just showing your hands in your sewing, right? Like
Yeah.
that's cool, but I don't know how sustainable that sort of thing is long term if you want to like build community. So like, I want to disagree. If you say something on stream that I disagree with, I want to like be in the chat. Like, I don't think that's right because we're friendly. We're friendly enough, and if I say it in a polite way, like we can have discourse, right? Not to say like I'm not gonna all of a sudden like start trashing you or whatever, but I think that's how you build relationships. Is like, hey, I relate with this person. Maybe I don't relate with this person. Maybe I can convince them. Maybe they can convince me, and that's like the whole thing. That's like the human condition, right? Like we want to
Yeah.
like grow.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're getting up to the end of the show, and I would love to, thank you again, Georgia, for hopping on, chatting with all sorts of different topics. I learned a couple of really interesting things about you, so I'm glad for that. Do you have any parting words or things that you'd like to promote? Shameless plug before we sign off.
Drink your Ovaltine.
Sure. More
I don't
Ovaltine,
know.
please.
I mean, like, basically, you follow me, Fierce
Yeah.
Kittens with the Z,
Yeah.
anywhere, all over.
Yeah. You did it the
Yeah.
right way. You have the one persona across everything. Like that's very, very hard.
Yeah. I got lucky because nobody wants to put a Z at the end of Fierce Kitten.
But it's so cool though. It's so cool.
Right. It was an accident.
That's an accident. Wait. An
Well,
accident?
I wanted Fierce Kitten.
Sure.
And I was like, screw it, I'll add a Z. It sounds neat. So I added the Z.
Sorry.
That's the story. There's nothing real cool about it.
No, with the Z is way cooler. Like no, maybe it's just because I'm extra, but like I think there's like an extra little bit of personality on top of it. Because if it was just Ferris Kid, I would still probably do the follow. Not gonna lie, but with the Z, I'm like, oh, insta follow every single time, everywhere. Awesome. So I do have one last question for you,
Mhm.
and you at the end of my streams, I love to ask my guests if they can kind of encapsulate tech, the community around it, basically everything they can think of related to this silly little world we live in, and only had one word to describe it. What word would that be to you?
Oh, come on. It would have been easier if you had asked me to name a class. No, you didn't laugh because it's the truth. I can't. Nobody can do it. I had to ask people in
You can
stream last night to name things for me.
you can cheat. You can use two words, sure. You can use a hyphenated word. It's okay, but don't. You're gonna get in trouble if you like start talking aimlessly about something. I want to see your problem solving skills right now.
Oh, for Christ's sake. Okay, hold up. Can I write a method to reverse a string instead?
Can you do a fizz bomb algorithm for me really quick? Fizz
Oh
buzz
God, no, not fizzbuzz. I hate that one. Okay, one word to describe tech.
or community around it or just your feelings.
Mm,
Do you know what's really good for streams and podcasts? Dead air.
I know. But you can kind of see the smoke coming out of my ears.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe uh exploration.
Oh, good. That's a good one. I did that. Okay, that sounded terrible. No, that's a good one because I've got
Thank
like
you. That's good.
good
You go
job, good
girl.
job. I need a button to do the clap. I need a button to do the clap. No, but seriously, I think exploration is a great one because, um, you know, backing into our conversation earlier about always needing to expand and grow. I think that's a great option. Like, and I'm not trying to be condescending. I promise you.
Oh my god.
Awesome.
No, that is hard
Well,
though. That was hard. Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
and I spring it on people at the end, and every single time people are like, "Oh, really?" But I'm like, "No, I enjoy it because I want to see people actually talk on their feet a little bit and uh, and think outside the box. Because as technologists, we like to be verbose usually, so
Yeah.
the compartmentalizing is what gets me off, I guess, a little bit. Um, Excellent. So thank you so much, George, for tuning in. Tuning in. Thank you for coming on the stream, and thanks to everybody tuning in. Uh, Fierce Kittens with a Z. If you don't follow her already on Twitch or Twitter or the Facebooks or the Instagrams or wherever all the kids are doing their things these days. Thank you again for everybody tuning in, listening, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.